be okay. I think I've been getting a wee bit of feedback, so I might try and mute from time to time to stop that. But as we still kind of let some people in, there's quite a lot of people coming for the talk, which is great. So we'll just let those people come in. But in the meantime, maybe I'll start the initial kind of welcomes and the information that you might need around GOMA and what we're doing. So as some of you may know, this is part of a wider programme to celebrate GOMA's 25th anniversary. Obviously, we would have much preferred to have been doing a lot more different celebrations this year, but most of it is online. And if you're wanting to view that previous talks or see what's come up in the wider programme, we'll put a couple of links in the chat for you, and you can click on those. So we've had some great talks, and we've got plenty lined up for the rest of the year. And this week essentially is our anniversary. It was officially opened a couple of days ago, and we've got a great talk tonight to talk about that. But before that, just to let you know that coming up on the 9th of April, part of our Coffee and Curators regular monthly talks, we've got my fellow curator Katie Bruce will be giving the talk From Ornament to Change, Contemporary Art and Human Rights Programmes. And that will be looking at GOMA's social justice programme, amongst other things. So again, we'll have a wee link of that in the chart. So just before we start, just to say that the talk tonight will be roughly around maybe half an hour, 40 minutes, and there'll be a chance for questions afterwards. So during the talk, if there's anything comes to mind, put questions in the chat, and then we can pick them back up again once we're finished, and we can open up to the floor for some questions and answers. Okay. If you need it, we do have live transcription. We'll put a link up for that, and you can click onto it. Just be warned, it doesn't really like Scottish accents. Seems particularly my Scottish accent, so it might be quite comical if you do look at the transcript. But it's there for you, and just to let you know that we are recording this, and we will put it up online in the next week or two, and we do clean up the transcript, so it will be subtitled if you do want to go back and listen to the talk again and have it transcribed for you there. Okay, so as I said, I'm having a wee bit of trouble with feedback, but hopefully I can mute myself, and we'll make that fine through. So I think, Angela, have we got most of the people in just now? So okay, so just now then we'll it's coming up for 10 past, so we'll start. So it's my great pleasure to welcome our guest speaker tonight, Andy Goldsworthy, and I'll just give a brief introduction for him here. So Andy Goldsworthy, OBE, is a sculptor, photographer and environmentalist who produces site-specific sculptures and land art situated in natural and urban settings. Based in Dumfriesshire, Goldsworthy has used the land and clay from that area for many works, and some of which we'll discuss tonight. Context and place is very important to him, leading to commissions all around the world. He's been represented in the Venice Biennale and works in many public and private collections, including the Tate, SF MoMA, and of course Glasgow museums. For the opening of GOMA in 1996, he installed a site-specific work, Clay 4, which we're going to talk about tonight, as well as his other works in the collection, his practice, and some recent works. So I'd like to give a very warm welcome to Andy Goldsworthy. So, hi, Andy.
Thanks very much.
Okay, so hopefully this will be quite a fairly informal little chat. We've got a few slides to look at, and we'll just kind of talk through a wee bit. But first of all, maybe go back slightly before the opening of GOMA in 1989, I think it is. Yep, and this is Tramway before really it was an arts venue, wasn't it? So this is Tramway after it was the Transport Museum, and this is your Snowballs. So I don't know if you then I guess this exhibition kind of opened up the idea of Tramway being an arts venue. Yeah, I don't know if you want to talk a wee bit about the Snowballs, because this was in the middle of summer, was it not? Is that
It was, yeah, and I mean it's a really important, it was an important show, or not just an exhibition, but an important project to do. In the obviously, I've always worked with snow as an artist from the very beginning, but the whole notion of taking something out of its season and representing it in this way was. It sort of had that feeling of, sometimes you can walk the mountains and you come across in the middle of June a patch of snow, and this thing that people have loved, hated all winter, it becomes so precious. It's as if the whole of winter has drained through that patch, and it's this white hole that winter exited the landscape. And it takes on such a power and preciousness almost, the snow, when it becomes like that. So the idea was that I would make snowballs in winter and then keep them in deep freeze and bring them out for in the middle of summer to melt. And each snowball had various different materials mixed inside of it. So as they melted, these materials emerged and dropped onto the floor and made sounds. And I think one was had daffodils in, so it was like these yellow lights coming to the surface, and then they would drop off. This was a spring snowball. I'll never forget the whole process of. We went up to Glen Shee, and it was one of the warmest winters on record. There was grass snowing on the ski slopes, all that kind of stuff. And I just had managed to scrape enough snow together from there and in Dumfriesshire to put the exhibition, to put the project together. And there it is. And then in 2000, I did one on the streets of London, again in the middle of summer, in the financial district of London, where I left them in the middle of the night. And so Londoners came into the city and were encountered by snowballs.
Isn't it? You can see there from the photograph with you standing next to them, there were quite substantial snowballs. How long did it take for them to melt and reveal what was inside?
It's difficult to remember. It's 2 or 3 days. They last a lot longer than I probably anticipated. And when they were outside in London, on the streets of London, the difference in the locations affected them dramatically, and some lasted for a very, very long time. I mean, it's obviously a very different context, being outside to inside, and the element of threat to the sculptures was greater. In that, if London is, people's reaction to ice and snow is usually to break it or jump on it, or snowmen. It's like there's this. It seems to produce the urge to break the thing. So it was amazing that they lasted as long as they did. I gave a press conference in London the morning that they'd been put out, and I knew I was kind of fighting for the life of the snowballs, because as soon as the tabloids got hold of artists makes snowballs, leaves them on streets of London, invents some figure that I was paid, and suddenly you've got this controversy, and I was very grateful, as I felt that for them, on most part, they left me alone, but I'll never forget it. But at that press conference, I was misquoted I think it was the Telegraph. They said it may seem, one of the snowballs was full of ash seeds, and all these thousands of ash seeds started dropping out of the snowball. And they said it may seem pointless for a snowball to drop thousands of seeds onto the streets of London, but that's how the land works. That's how nature works. It throws out thousands of seeds in the hope that one may take hold. Anyway, that was reduced in the Telegraph to, the artist said the project was pointless. And the Christian Salvason, the cold storage company who sponsored the show, withdrew their sponsorship at that point. It was too late anyway. But the power of the press.
Yeah.
To the way it could affect things. So, but I was generally really, really grateful that the tabloid left it alone and let it be, because it was just wonderful to see them change over a period of several days. Anyway, I could go on for hours about that one particular project. So
yeah, we'll move on then, because actually there's some kind of links to some of the works that are obviously in our collection, which we'll talk about in a wee minute. But I guess, was this in any way, did this lead on to your commission for Goma? Did you start speaking to Julian Spalding or anyone like that from here, do you think? Or how did you?
I don't remember the kind of timeline. It was. It really did feel like part of a lot of things that was going on, not just in Scotland, but what I was doing in other countries too. And it was with Stefan van Rey and Arne Barlow and Julian. It was a sort of very mixed. It felt like I was in the world, not just Glasgow, but obviously Scotland is the place that generates a lot of my work, so a lot of my ideas come from the Scottish, not my ideas. I am from that landscape. I am of that landscape. It's not just my ideas, it's the source. And it was a very significant thing to be doing. But yes, the snowballs and the connection to change and impermanence, and how to actually bring that into an indoor setting that actually address the notions of ephemerality and movement, and something's passing through, and how appropriate for a place that was about transport, about things that had been there and now gone at this moment where it was in a state of change.
Yeah, indeed. So the next, just before I click on the next slide, because I'm not too sure if the video plays straight away, but some people I'm sure will remember the clay floor, some people may not. So we've got a wee video clip here, about a minute and a half, from a BBC documentary. And I don't know if you've seen this anytime soon, but you are featured on it for a wee second, so it's quite nice. So I'm just going to play this, if that's okay.
Putting clay onto the floor. Once laid, as it dries, it will crack, and that will be the work. I like this idea of this flow of earth that's running through the building, and you're seeing here possibly a glimpse of something that's much bigger, that is flowing on beyond the building. And I want it to act like a memory contained within the building. The earth of which this building is somehow remembered and risen to the surface, of a reminder of its origin and its connection to the landscape. I decided to do it here because you can walk up the stairs and look down onto the clay, and it will become a landscape of cracks.
Okay. It's a great wee video, the BBC video. We've looked at it, and it's such a wee time capsule of something wonderful. Yeah, so that was, for people who don't know, Gallery 2, which is now got our exhibition Taste in it, which has some of Andy's work that we're going to look at later. Fortunately, the clay floor isn't there anymore, but at that point in time, Gallery 2 was called the River Gallery, which so was very apt that you had this clay floor at the end of it. What do you remember about the commission, Andy?
Well, it was again like the snowballs, an attempt at trying to address the indoor space, not just as a place to show something, but to actually engage with the nature of the building and the. For me, nature doesn't stop at a city or at the doorstep of a building. It is in that, it's in the table, it's in our clothes, it's in us. We are nature, and the nature of things. It was. What I read, it was the beginning. So I think it was the second clay floor that I'd done. The first one was in London with white porcelain clay. This was done with clay from Dumfriesshire, and it's a red. It's a much redder than it appears in that image. And it is about unpredictability. It was in a confined space, but it was about the way things crack, the unpredictability of that. And what was surprising and I hadn't anticipated was how the joists of the building affected the surface of the crack. So if you'd seen the from the film, if you were looking down, you could see these kind of lines that were where the clay was a little thinner or it dried out differently. And that had a profound effect on works that I made after that in clay and in other things. The idea that what lies below talks to the surface, or indeed looking at the surface isn't. I mean, art for me is a way of trying to get beyond the surface appearance of it, to try and understand what lies below. It's like that's a big part of everything I do. I want to engage with it, to understand it, to learn, and I learned so much in that work that's traveled with me, continues to travel with me.
Great, yeah. And you were saying that you learned a wee bit from the how it went on. Is this so? For example, this clay wall drawing is this the National Museums of Scotland? Is that right?
It is in the early people's section, where I was asked to make work that would be in dialogue with the collection when it was renovated and rebuilt. And so what I learned in Glasgow at GOMO was that if I altered the different depths of clay, I could start creating forms within the cracking. So that sort of sinuous form in the wall is deeper than the clay around it. So it's maybe 3 inches deep, whereas this clay on the surrounding is about 1 inch deep. So you create these different circumstances and cracking. I mean, there is an element of control in that, but there's also there's always going to be unpredictability in the process, and the way the clay sagged, and I love the way that it comes and goes and isn't perfect. It was but I did do some drawings that predicted it would do that, and I did a very small test in my studio on a small area. But generally, this was the test, just like GOMO was the test. I very rarely try things out before. I sometimes should do it more often, not get in much trouble as I sometimes do, but it would not be as interesting for me.
And are you still doing clay floors? When was the last time you've done a clay floor or clay wall? Have you still...
Well, I think the last clay work I did was actually for it was an orchard in Ohio, which there was remnants of old orchards. There was some live trees and a lot of dead trees, and the orchard is now a sculpture. The whole orchard. It's where apples used to be grown commercially, and I took a dead tree, left it in the place, and dug clay from around it, and built a house over the dead tree, and then covered the entire house and the tree in clay. And the whole thing is cracked. And you just open the door, stand on the threshold, and you look into this room of cracks with a dead tree that grew from the ground in that place that is now covered with ground. So it's a very so that was probably the most virtuosic clay work I've probably done. But then no, it's endlessly fascinating, the whole process of clay, and in fact, where I am now, that might be the next clay work. Who knows?
You spoke about how important the clay was as far as the colour goes, but also how important was it came from Dumfries? Is that where it came from?
Yeah. Well, we have this red earth and red clay in Dumfriesshire, particularly where I live, and there are clay pits, and collect the clay from, and this is where I got the clay, and I return to this clay pit often to get materials. It's extraordinary color, and farmers used it for coloring their sheep. They rubbed the sheep with this to make them look nice, you know, the red, which is why we see these, and the colored sheep we see now are like that because they use dyes, but it has this origin in earth, you know, and about aesthetics, which is really interesting, that farmers felt that, oh, I like a red sheep. In fact, you know, anyway, yeah, no, it's a remarkable color.
Yeah, so this is also one of our works that we have in the collection. The image on the left hand side, we have this in the, lucky enough to have this in the collection, and there's a few works that connect because of the clay and where you've used it from. I don't know if you remember. Unfortunately, we have a sketch of it, but because we haven't been able to get back in the building, we couldn't do it. But this circular um, circular shape going down into darkness. We've got a wee sketch that you proposed, a kind of similar shape, but it was going to be in Goma's entranceway after the Nicky de St. Val mirrored room. We've got a kind of oval shape. I think it was meant to be dug in there, and it was going to be a big hole. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, well I do now. Yeah, but it was the oval shape. You know, when you stand at the top of the stairs and you look down, there's these kind of series of levels which are like holes into the ground. So I just wanted to continue those levels deeper into the ground, so there'd be this draw you down into the ground as an expression of connectivity to the ground below. And it would have been really great to have actually used clay from Goma for that, if it came out of the. And building sites are fascinating, you know, the rawness of a building site and the materials that are thrown up, and I get very interested in trying to keep that rawness, so bring that reminder of the rawness and the nature of that particular site that is exposed often during construction as part of the work. But anyway, that one didn't happen. That is, I mean, it's extraordinary how many things I do get away with, to be honest. But typically, I will make several proposals, of which only a few ever get done. But it always surprises me how people are prepared to take these things on.
Yeah, well, I think we were quite enamoured when we seen that. I think it would be quite amazing. One, as you say, from looking down, but it says something to have a big hole as soon as you walk into the art gallery, as well as the clay floor and the pit holes. The other work that kind of connects to the clay are these snowball drawings, which obviously I guess slightly relate to tramway as well. So this is the process. You sent these photographs over. We've never seen these, so this is fascinating for us to see how the process happened. And again, unfortunately, because we don't have access to images, I managed to grab this from an old photograph on my phone. But this is the final drawing that we have in the collection. Snowball drawing. So was this clay from the same pits?
Well, it is. No, it's from the same pit, but that red is the amalgamation of all the different colors that are in there. Red is the dominant color; it overtakes the rest. But picking through, all of those colors in the snowballs are in that clay at different layers, and I think that there is that always that fascination to start examining the material and taking it apart rather than just putting it together as I did with the making the clay, but also to do the opposite, which is what are the colors in here, and I mixed the clay with the snowballs and made that drawing. The drawing was made on a large sheet of paper set at an angle. I'd put a kind of rim around it so the water couldn't flow off, but that was it. The only thing I could do was either turn the heating up or turn it down or whatever. The drawing made itself, and as the snowballs melted, they began to affect the paper. The paper starts to buckle and starts to talk with the earth and the snowballs. So it's a very beautiful process, but it has its own energy and demand. So and it's the same with the cracking of the floor. I release these things, but that doesn't. And I have some sort of control, and I know, and I don't accept anything that happens. It's not about I want something really, really great, you know. And there are a lot of things that I think, oh, that wasn't interesting. And so there are sort of criteria around the work, but I like this sense of not being in complete control. And I think that's what you really have to learn when you work outside, that you're not in control and you have to work with what's going on, and there's a resistance there. And I miss that often when I am inside. I can't find that kind of resistance, that friction that stimulates me, that gets me thinking. And this is why I bring materials in when I'm indoors that actually speak loudly, if not more loudly, because they're inside. They will dry out and crack. They will melt in an unpredictable fashion.
Well, that brings me on. Oh, no, so actually, thought I had a different slide there, so I'll keep that for later. But yeah, so this goes on to red rubbed rocks, which isn't a work from a collection before we talk about a wee bit, still talking about the clay and the use of it.
Well, it's also the color red, and this is also in Dumfriesshire, and the red is come from small soft iron stones that have a large content of iron, and when you rub it on the rock, it starts to bleed into the water. And the reason it's red is because of its iron content, and that's the reason our blood is red too. So there's a very visceral connection to this color and what it means, and the violence and the life and the energy of that color. So I identify very strongly with that as a material and a color, and it's one that I'm drawn to continuously.
Mm. And you are drawn to this in the red walls, which I'm not as familiar about with this work. Red walls. This is under construction.
Yeah, this is one of the I was asked by the David Ross Foundation who for a property in Yorkshire that to make works, and I proposed to make two houses. One was on the site of an old building that I rebuilt as an artwork, and I proposed to make a house at this point where red iron comes out of the ground, and it's a ditch that is the site. The right is the first digging of the hole for making the house. And that's the red earth. That's the iron in the ground, you know.
And you come from Yorkshire? Is that correct?
I do, and my parents lived 8 miles away from where this place is. You know, it's to be at this stage in my life. You know, I'm 64, 65 this year, coming back to the place from where a lot of my ideas and how that fashioned me. This landscape fashioned me as a young artist, and I worked on farms. So to be working in this particular valley in Rosedale is just quite extraordinary, and it's a landscape that has everything that interests me. It's rough, it's tall, it's raw, it's got an industrial heritage. It is also known as the land of iron. This iron came out of this ground here that generated the Industrial Revolution, you know, and it's quite an extraordinary place.
Yeah, and this is the red wall that was.
Yeah, this is so this is the back wall of the building. So imagine it's a house. You open the door, and I've tapped into the red, which runs through these openings in the back wall and makes this red drawing on the wall and the floor. And this was shortly after it's finished, about a few months after it's finished, and then it's kind of drained up for about 4 or 5 years. And things began to grow on the wall. There were ferns, and it's the red started to really kind of disappear and die down a bit. Anyway, coming back, I mean, now back working on this particular project here, and revisited. Oh, sorry, I'm working on the project that has emerged from these two original works. Anyway, I went to revisit the walls, and after the very heavy rain, it is bleeding with red in this building. It is so beautiful after being dormant for so long. And the green bits that I began to feel a bit about now, look, I've been totally overpowered by the red, and that friction between the vivid green and the red is violent. And I don't know whether it's a work that is talking about pain or about life, or I mean, it's just such a complex work, and it is I just love that this has tortured me, this work. I can't, it tortured me in the making of it. I lost the red at one point. It was so elusive, and I couldn't tap into it again. And then it came, and then it went for several years, and it's just astonishing to see it. And I wish I'd put an image of how it is now. And the it is quite extraordinary, and it will develop. It will begin to. It will keep depositing the red and build up on the floor, and people can walk in there and sit in the room and be with this room, and then it just dries up again.
Yeah, and people can go and see it. It's not on a private land or anything like that. People can go.
It is on private land, but it's a public. There's a walk. The sculpture that has grown from these two initial works, because I was asked to come up with other ideas, and I decided to propose to make 10. I found 10 buildings, old buildings, derelict buildings, that I proposed that I would rebuild as artwork. So in the rebuilding, I have this conversation with the building, what it was, there's this dialogue with this place, this identifiable space that people lived, worked, died, born. These are very powerful containers for human activity, even though they are ruinous. And this notion of bringing it back and working with it and rebuilding the building, and in exchange for rebuilding it, I am allowed to make it into art.
Which we'll have a wee look at two of the most recent ones actually later on. But in the meantime, we'll maybe just come back to the collection. And actually, this was the slide I thought I was going on to when you were talking about not being able to control and being open to what may come. And I love this work in that sense that you're given the energy to the sticks, but you can't control what happens with that energy, or that's the way I see it for these throwing of the sticks. And you do this quite a lot, don't you? That idea of instigating something, but then just capturing.
Well, it's about a release of energy, but there is a control in. It's not a control. It's not. There's an unpredictability about it. But I know if I throw it in a certain way, with a certain gesture, with a certain amount of force or energy. So that'll be the same whether I've got petals in my mouth and I'm spitting. How to spit? How to throw? There is a skill and a craft in these random acts of randomness, which and it could also be taken into account which way the wind's blowing, the way the sun, the light, that it is all of these things that I'm trying to understand and gain some sort. It is a bit like being on a ship in a storm. You can't stop the storm, but you can try to sail through it. You can't control the sea, but you can try and navigate your way through it in a way that the more experienced you are, the more you understand the sea, the more you understand the weather, the movement of the situation, that you can get through it because you understand it. And I think it's this understanding that's gained through the act of making art is what I'm after.
And that does again lead on to this work. So, with that understanding, or I guess what I find fascinating about this is you are in your practice. You're often open to situations, to happenstance. We spoke about this work, and I said I wanted to include it because actually this work and the clay floor had a really big impact on me. I came to Goma when I was doing my portfolio to try and get into art school, and and actually this was some of the first works that I've ever physically seen that really made me start to think outside the box, think about concept or think about actions rather than, because up until then I was in school just learning about Monet with slides. I hadn't actually really interacted with contemporary art or artwork or anything other than stuff in books, really. So when I seen the clay floor and I seen this image, I was particularly taken with it, and I was just amazed that it's such a simple act, but yet not many people would think of doing it, and it's so it works so well. Just um, literally flipping over these leaves, and you do this quite a lot. I think you said that this would only happen if because of the light that was on that certain day. Can you talk a wee bit about that?
Well, it's in the south of France, so generally it's a little sunnier there than really obviously working in Scotland, we generally have a fairly grey sky for a lot of the time, which I love, that kind of calmness. I do find it more difficult working in a very sunny place. In fact, because I think that light can conceal as much as it reveals. It just camouflages a place on the woodland floor. And this work and another work I made at the same time, which was a poppy boulder covered in a granite boulder that I covered in poppy leaves, poppy petals. So it's this blood red round boulder about this big in amongst a whole heap of boulders. We're very much about that particular kind of calm, quiet light, because the color. I think the problem when it's sunny is that the sun is all about reflection, whereas when it goes overcast, the color comes out from the form itself. It's like radiating color. It's not reflected light. It's internal color that's coming out. And those crazy, in the evening in Scotland, and the guys in the luminous jacket get more luminous just before it goes dark, because there's kind of intensity about color at that particular time. No, I love that. So that was very much, and it's calm too. It's a calm. If it'd been windy, I wouldn't probably have made that work, because they're just, I think they're probably just laid on. I can't see any. Sometimes I'll put a little thorn to attach it, almost like a badge to the bracken, and yeah.
I think that's what I loved about it, the fact that it was, obviously a chance encounter that's made such a beautiful work. So that's all the collection work. I think what we have 4 or 5 works in the collection, and you can see some of them when we finally open. We're back open up in April 26th. There's some works in the Gallery 2 in the Taste, and we also have works in our collection GMRC. But moving on, I guess, to some other works, I'm aware, actually, we've maybe not got a lot of time, but I would just kind of say the same with that happenstance. I really always loved the rain shadow works. I remember, again, being in art school and speaking to David Harding, and David talking about how he really admired your ability to make a work instantly and just think about be in the world and be ready to make a work. And whenever I see those rain shadows, I always think of David and talking about your work, which was really great. But I guess we've just got 2 things we'll try and go through quite quickly, the red flags, and then we'll come back to the works that you've been doing just now. But I just wanted to talk quickly about the Red Flag Commission, because it goes back to clay, but also that interesting that you were talking about iron and blood. So I don't know if you want to kind of just...
Yeah, I'm just going to put my charger on because I'm going to run out of battery in a minute.
no problem, no problem.
No, the Red Flags project was proposed for the Rockefeller Center in New York, and which is a, I mean, it's a very well, you know, the Rockefeller Center is not the kind of place I would normally think I could make it work. It's a bit blingy. Anyway, I went to have a look because you know it's really interesting to be put in this situation where you would have possibly dismissed. But anyway, they said you can do work with all the flags that are around the ice rink in winter, and the flags had flags of all the countries of the world. But actually, when I was there, I looked up and said, no, they're not. They're of the states of America, which they were. So I made a proposal that we would replace the flags with flags stained with red earth from each state of America. So there are actually 109 flags. So some states are represented 3 times, more, all are represented twice. But all these earths were sent to me, or I collected them when I was in the States. I got 4 or 5 states when I was there, but the rest was sent to me by people. So a lot of it was really important that it was red because of what I said before, the human association with the color and the connectivity of red, the idea of the red being this vein that runs around the earth and connects people. And it was fascinating to also see what people thought was red. You know, they sent me stuff that really wasn't red. I usually have on the label red, you know, as if to convince me it was red. So some of them are not so red, but some of them are amazing. And they, I mean, this project I could go on and on about. It was going to fly on Earth Day in April last year, which was postponed, and eventually they flew in September of last year, and they were there for a week. And there's a chance that they may be shown in San Francisco. But it would be a great way. I'd love to show this again, and I think Glasgow would be a great place, possibly when the Earth Summit's on. But I don't know if we've got enough flagpoles somewhere to put it on. But it was about it was an anti-flag work. You know, it didn't have the kind of it was about things that connect people, not divide them. And during this past year, with all the events that happened and the turmoil and the upheavals, it's just been such a powerful work to have had flying during this time. And on the eve of the American election, I combined all the red earth together and stained a flag and hung it on the eve of the election. And I made a video work of it, which is an hour and a half long, just shows it going to black. And I took stills from this image, and I send works out to people every so often. I have a small group of people I send works to, and Tina, my partner, saw and said, "You can't send that. You can't send that. It's too dark." And you know, the night of that election, I stayed up all night, and it was such a dark night in every respect. I actually sent it the following morning, but it kind of expressed a lot of those things that were going on for me at that time. And then when Biden was inaugurated, I hung it back up, and it's still flying, and it will be there for 4 years, and it is already getting worn and tattered, but it'll have all the memory of these 4 years that a lot has to be done, you know.
Yeah, as you said, there's going to be a lot of context and reading, especially within what's happened this year. And you said that it was quite a blingy square, which obviously it is, and then also talking about what may or may not happen with your work. I presume the clay might be embedded in the flag, but it's not set. So there could have been, or could there have been a possibility of, say, heavy rain and that red starting to bleed into that square? Was
Well,
that even?
yeah, and there was that talk about that, of course. Well, what's it going to happen? I mean, I thought it was wonderful, the idea these flags will be red everywhere, and what if it splashes people? I thought, well, that'd be amazing. But that didn't fly. The flags did, and they're very little red coming from them, but they're actually pristine as they stand. And now they're a work that can go on the walls. They can hang on in the walls of a building, in a gallery. I have 50 that I think I would keep pristine, and the other I would like to see get weathered and worn and battle hardened. I'd also I did a video work from this too. Each flag was filmed for 3 minutes and put into a 2.5 hour long film, which I would have loved to have had on drive-in movies all over America. So this image of the flying flag could rise above the landscape, not sit there in your car watching the movie. It would just be there flying.
So I'm aware of time. We did start a wee bit late, obviously, when everybody gets in. So if people don't mind, would you like to just talk about the last two works that you're currently, well, you've just worked on, and it's down where you're working just now? Maybe take that 5 minutes about that, and then we can go for questions, if that's okay, if everybody's fine with that. So this work is called, well, it's Hanging Stone, is that correct? And this is what you were talking about earlier with that same site, that you're kind of resurrecting the buildings around it, but in doing so turning them into artworks. So is this what you're?
Yeah, this is where I'm working now. It's a 6-mile walk, and there are 10 houses along the walk, and the houses are all the work, and it's called Hanging Stones because the lane that runs up the valley is called Hanging Stone Lane. And it could have been a title for my one. I mean, if you know my Balance Rocks or whatever, the sense of hanging stones. And this 11-ton stone came from a quarry about 100 yards from the house. The house is called Hanging Stone House. So there's this, it's in 2 stories, 2 floors in the building. You can approach from the top and below. So from the top, you see this, the stone in the image before, and it is suspended with steel work. It's about this, about a foot and a bit off the ground. So it is actually hanging there in the most threatening of ways. And every time I go in, I think it's dropped a bit, but it hasn't. It's that edgy. And the whole process of making it, the bringing the stone, and I'll never forget when we went, that we picked out the stone and we got the biggest machine possible to lift this thing. And then the guys driving the machine started getting out the manual to figure out if it could actually lift this stone. And they set we had to take a little bit of the building down, and he said, we're only going to have one shot at this to get this in before the hydraulics pop, and it just went in. It's beautiful. And this is one of 10 houses that I hope to be fit. I've made, I think, 5 so far, and I'm working on the latest 2 houses. And it is really will be the culmination of everything that I've done. It will be, I've twice, this is the 3rd time I've attempted to do a work that isn't something just by itself in the landscape, but is a layer laid upon it. That is a walk, that is a building, that is it's a flow of people. It's many things. It's not just this object. And I did the Sheepfold project, and that kind of ground to a halt. I did the Refuge d'Art project in the south of France, which was going to be a 9-day walk where people slept in bothes that were turned into artworks. I made 3 or 4. It ran out of money. With Hanging Stones, I have the funding, I have the place. I just don't have the planning permissions, and that has delayed the project by 3-4 years. And were it not but for the huge public local support and the planning committee going against the planning officer's recommendations, this work of great beauty and a huge personal importance would not be made. And it is that close not to succeeding. It would hurt. It'd be enormously painful for this one not to be completed. I'm 65. I can still physically work on the pieces, and I'm bringing to this project all that I've learned in my life. Anyway, I can get really passionate about this project,
And
but this is
this
where
is
I'm working now.
So this is the second one, and both of them are obviously beautiful. I love the fact that, you know, at first you're not too sure what's going on here. Obviously, it'd be different seeing it in person, and then you suddenly see that the roof was off and the stone was lifted in, and yeah, it's like. But then this one here, so this is the drawing for the proposal,
And
and then
this
again, yeah.
this work was conceived during the last year, so it is probably it is a specific response to what's gone on, and the need to make something that has some sense of uplift and hope about it. I've made a lot of things that aren't. Don't get me wrong, but this one I really wanted to have that sense of optimism about it. So this is the building that which we've rebuilt, and there are oak branches, some from Scotland, some from Yorkshire. I had to do a lot of collecting because of the lockdown in Scotland. They were brought down, and the next image you're probably going to show is how it looks from the inside, and this I cannot explain to you, or the images cannot explain to you what these works are like to stand in, the atmosphere, and this walk you go on, and then into this, you see it, the idea that of a house being this place of shelter and sanctuary is just totally turned on its end when you get in there, and it's either pouring with red on the walls, or there's this big stone, like stepping into a room with an elephant. They are threatening, and the one that I'm working on now will be lined with barbed wire. It's that some of them are very tough, the works. It's a tough place.
And so how many in total will there be? So you've already got 3 done, is that right?
I know I've made, I think we're on 5 now. I forget, 5, 6. We've got yeah, maybe it's even 7. Sorry, it should just come out of my like that. I'm sort of so engaged with what I'm doing. I could count them up, but that'd be really boring. But let's just say I'm over halfway, and I've got after the I'm waiting for permissions for another one. I've got 2 permissions to do the 2 houses I'm working now, which I only got 2 weeks ago. I'm working, hopefully get the permission for the next one in the next 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. I don't know. They really stretch it out. And then I've got 2 more to make, and that'll be the 10.
That's amazing.
It's an astonishing act of generosity on the part of the David Ross Foundation to do this work, and it is, he can't move them. They can't move the works. They're for the place. They belong to the place. They're about the place, and there's this, and people can come and walk and see these works, and they are part of the work. They're not observers, they're participants in the works. This is the landscape for me has a strong social nature, and that's expressed in the paths that people make, the buildings that they make, the way that they walk and pass through the landscape. So they're very much part of that work. It is all of the things that interest me.
That's great. Can't wait to go down and visit it. So we're just going to finish on these images, and then we'll open it up to questions. But this is, Andy, you sent this through today just to show that, like as we said, you're open to make artwork at any time, and you literally made the willow work today. Was that?
Yeah, correct? Yeah, the bottom right hand corner was made today. The weather has been amazing, but these are I've been doing these handworks for the past year, and it started in summer last year, and I just collected tree branches and stuffed them into my hand and held them there, and then I take the pictures too. So I've got a cowboy release. I like that kind of whole kind of not knowing what I'm really photographing, and it'll take me an hour or so to get what I'm after. When I come to let go, I can't. My hand is fixed, and I kind of pull my hand apart, and I got these amazing lines and ridges from where the branches have indented onto my hand. They're really interesting. Anyway, I did the ones in summer, then I made some in autumn with the autumn leaves, and then in winter I made them with the bare twigs, and now it's spring, and I'm making the spring hands. And at each time of making these works, I don't think I've made anything that's really made me examine the differences. And this is coming from me, who works with trees and all the time. I never realized how different branches were from each tree. And now spring is here, and just as soon as they start to the leaves explode, they're all so different, with different qualities, different feels. And the one on the bottom is with willow, and it was from a tree just from where I'm staying. I could see it illuminated against the hill, which was in shadow, and it's just this incredible mass of light and energy and life. So I went up there and did the willow, and it's a concentration of all those things, and I feel connected to that tree, and I feel I understand that tree in a way I would never have done had I not made that work. And that's such an amazing gift of art for artists.
No, thanks, Andy. You can just feel your passion, and you're all for it. So that's great. And thanks for talking us through a wee bit about the works in the collection and what you've been doing just now and stuff. I hope everybody else has enjoyed that as much as I have. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and then we can maybe take some questions if anybody has any in the Q&A or the chat box. I think Angela might be able to have a wee look and see if there's any questions for us.
I think it's going to be me, Martin, if that's okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Andy. That was really quite incredible to sit in the corner of my back room listening to all of that about your work and give such a rich insight into the practice as well over time and how it's still unfolding. There's a couple of really lovely comments saying thank you so much about how your work inspires others in the chat. And then there's one question here that I think maybe leads on a little bit to what you were talking about, how materials behave at different times of the year that you work with, but it's actually, do you find as you've worked over your career, climate change impacting the way that you use materials or the things you've learned about how they behave at different times of the year?
Well, I have to say that there's so much change happening all the time that I cannot tell through what I see the evidence of. I think it'd be wrong for me to say that I could see evidence. That climate change is happening is for sure, absolutely for sure. But it's through scientific evidence that I see that or know about that. I think that the landscape is being affected by the way that we're now hopefully addressing those issues, and that I see that there will be huge changes to the landscape over the years as a response, and addressing human activity to the landscape will have a direct effect on what I would do, and the landscape will change. But it's a complicated and challenging situation we're in.
Thank you. I think we're sort of at 7 o'clock. So I think we might just draw this to close. I don't know, Martin, if you want to say a few thank you. Well, mainly Andy. I want to say thank you to you both, but I'll let you say thank you to Andy for this. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, there's one more question in the chat from Leslie, who says that I've loved your work since I first saw the Leeds exhibition in 1985, and it continues to inspire me. How do you see them now?
The leaves. Is it Leeds or Leeds? Sorry.
The Leeds exhibition,
All right, the one at the Natural History Museum, I guess.
1985.
1995. And how do I see the leaves now? Well, the I recently, well, fairly recently, about 2-3 years ago, I decided to make a new group of leaf works. Kind of assuming that as I grow older, my hands will become less dexterous. And if I'm going to do this, I better do it now. And I made a large group of leaf works. And I'm pleased to say that not only can I still do all the leaf and the thorns and what have you, I have a better understanding of the form and the leaf now than I have ever had. And because they're very much about growth, you know, the way the forms that I make come from growth, the way things grow, one leaf laid on another, so another and another, and that's how these works grow. And I spent 2 or 3 years working on this group of leaf works that is now housed in a small building, and it's mine. It's like my room, you know, my work. It's in a place that I own. So, and I love that building. It's just a small, modest building with it's called the Leaf House. I don't anticipate making any more like that.
Thanks, Andy. As Katie says, I guess we're kind of over time, but I've seen lots of great stuff in the chat from Wales and northwest of Ireland and all around. So thanks everybody for coming, and I hope you can join me in thanking Andy for the fascinating talk. So thanks very much. And as we say, hopefully the artist talk next month is from Jackie Donaghy. So if you want to join us for that, that's great. And then check out the Goma blog for our upcoming programme for our 12th anniversary. But again, Andy, thanks very much. And everyone, thank you for attending. And hopefully we'll see you again soon.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.